Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is Ruairi Robertson, and he is a postdoc research fellow at the Pasteur Institut, no less, and he focuses on the gut microbiome. And we met, it was probably 8 years ago or something, wasn't it, Ruairi? When you were speaking at a TEDx
event.
8
years ago, 2015, I think.
Yeah.
So, exactly.
And I remember I had just kind of clued into the microbiome at that point. And so I was so thrilled to work with you and hear what you had to say about it. And I thought your speech was fabulous. We'll put a link to that speech in the show notes for sure. But let's start there and let's talk a little bit about what you talked about in that talk. And then, did that talk have any effect on your future? Because that was that was TEDx Fulbright, if I remember right. And you did a fabulous job.
That was definitely,
I think how many views does that talk have now?
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there, John. Yeah.
Oh, interrupt me a lot. It's okay.
Oh God, I think it's over 5 million views, I think, is last time I checked anyway. So certainly way more than I was anticipating when I was a young Ph.D. student giving that talk back in the day. I think my initial plan was my dad had a TEDx talk from a university thing himself, and he had 10,000 views, and my initial goal was God, I want to beat my dad, I want to try and get 10,000 views, and now I'm sitting here with, many
5
millions.
million. Yeah, that's congratulations to you, and it was a fabulous talk. So, just if you don't mind, because of the nature of the show and the nature of what I do and our interaction, what do you remember about preparing for that talk, and what do you remember about preparing for and giving that talk? What stands out 8 years later?
Stands out, I didn't have a huge amount of experience. I was in the middle of my PhD, and my university were very good at holding these competitions to explain your research within 2 or 3 minutes to an audience. So I'd done a couple of those talks, and that had kind of helped me to synthesize complex topics into a way that a normal person could understand. Yeah. So I'd had a little bit of experience, and then saw this event, and you were great, and the other trainers in really helping us to build a story, and bring yourself into it, and really explain the impact of why your research is important, and I especially remember you saying, John, this is your life's work, give it the emphasis that it deserves and it requires, and talk about, and bring a story into it as well. And it's exactly what I did in the end. I spoke about kind of, my family's background in research, to try and kind of engage the audience a bit at the start, bring a bit of humor into it, and then slowly work your way into the science and bring people into this fascinating connection between the mind and the gut. So, any good communicator knows that bringing in a story and making it personal really makes a communication engaging.
Yeah, and it made it 5 million views at this point engaging, which I'm really proud of you for. And I remember you worked on that, and you really did bring yourself to it like you were speaking about your life's work, which you were, And I think a lot of times people kind of forget that aspect, it's kind of obvious in hindsight, but, and I'll never forget, I do forget the guy's name, but the guy who noticed that the people that ate that Bulgarian yogurt or whatever it was, right, were just happier.
Yeah. Eli Mechnikov was his name. Yeah. He kind of found they were living longer lives anyway, and he he changed his whole scientific career to start studying those things. So, amazingly now where I'm working is actually I'm working in the Metchnikoff building in the Pasteur Institute. So it's funny how these things come around.
Wow.
He won the Nobel Prize. He did a lot of that work in the Pasteur Institute here in Paris. And, maybe it was always in the back of my mind I wanted to work here, or maybe it's just kind of one of those things that happens in life. But yeah, I'm working in the Metchnikoff building now in the Pasteur Institute, where he would have worked back in the day. Yeah, it's amazing.
That's truly amazing. That's totally amazing. Now, tell us, just so that people aren't wondering, there's a whole bunch more in your talk that they need to go see your talk for. But tell us, what was it that he ended up discovering about that? Was it conferring some kind of protection? Because will you explain that?
Yeah, of course. So his original research was looking at the immune system, and he discovered how particular immune cells, some of which are called macrophages, how they function in the body. But he then I don't know, was it through his life or through his research, he kind of discovered these people who were living long lives. And he was studying, how some people die from infections and don't die of infections. So, for example, there was a big cholera epidemic around that time, and he noticed some people were dying, some people weren't dying. He tested on people in the lab. He gave them cholera to see, these poor researchers working with him to see how some people responded. But what he found was that there were certain bugs or certain microbes that lived within the intestines of people, which helped to, either stimulate the growth of cholera or actually inhibit the growth and kill it off. And so he kind of hypothesized then that this right balance of microbes inside of the body was important actually for longevity and living a healthy life. Whereas, the dogma, I suppose, or the common knowledge in medicine at that point was that all microbes are bad. They're all germs. We need to get rid of them. The intestine is just this tube that, excretes waste and really he was the father of this whole field that changed everything in microbiology and everything we know these days about gut health.
Yeah, and boy, did it. Boy, I mean, it took a while, right? Like he was working when in the was it that the late 1800s or
so that would have been around his career would have been from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. I think it was kind of was it 1911, 1912 that he died? Or maybe it was the 1920s. And it was around that period that he would have been active. Yeah.
So it took us a while to catch up.
Yeah, antibiotics were discovered, not too long after he died. And that was the major, I suppose, revolution and change. Yeah. And, of course, antibiotics are very important, and they're one of the reasons that we live much longer lives these days, because people don't die of common infections anymore.
Right.
But they have this huge fallback. They have a real downside as well. And so his Metchnikoff's research was only, rediscovered is probably the wrong word, but kind of recognized more again in the last couple of decades.
Yeah. So, and I think a lot more people now have heard of the microbiome. You explaining what you do must be easier now than it was. But tell us a little bit about, catch us up on what you've been thinking about and what you've been seeing and what's been happening in the field of the microbiome, because I think it's just an absolutely, I guess, let me back up. I don't know how we even made medicine work before we, sequenced DNA and understood that everybody's got, very different DNA and different reactions to things. And then also discovered the microbiome. It's like, it's not as homogenous as I think everybody thought. And there are things going on that we were just not even thinking about in the microbiome, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of changed a lot of our thinking in medicine and how we approach treatment, but also prevention of disease. you mentioned DNA sequencing, but that would have in the early 1990s, mid 1990s, and people thought, well, now we've able to sequence the human genome, we'll be able to know everyone's genes, every gene in every human, and that will be the answer to medicine. Unfortunately, it didn't quite live up to the hype, because I mean, you can't change someone's genome, and now we're living in the hype of the microbiome, and so a lot of this research, or a lot of the kind of talk around it, maybe is a little bit of hype. We still have to be a little bit cautious, but the exciting thing is we can change our microbiomes, and so there are real developments in targeting the microbiome to help enhance medicines for certain diseases. So the big, very famous one that people might be aware of are called fecal microbiome transplants. And this, kind of does what it says in the tin. You take a stool sample or a fecal sample from a healthy person, and you transplant it directly into the colon of an unhealthy person. Now, at the moment, the only clinical condition that this is indicated for is if you have this really bad recurrent infection called C. diff, or Clostridium difficile. But
I have
there's really exciting evidence that's kind of emerged over the last few years.
I have a really good friend who actually got that because he was on such massive antibiotics because he had a post-operative infection, and that potentially saved his life, right? And I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. People. No, you're okay. You're okay. People die from this infection, in hospital. You usually pick it up in hospital. Now, it's usually older people that acquire it, but certainly, people in middle age as well certainly pick it up, and it's awful. It's all, people have this persistent diarrhea, persistent, really awful intestinal symptoms for weeks, months, if not longer, and it keeps coming back. And this fecal transplant treatment is the best known treatment for that, and it's doubly effective versus antibiotics.
Yeah, amazing. So, and what are some of the things that you're looking at and thinking about in particular right now? You want to talk about any of your particular work?
Absolutely. I'm at the moment a little bit more focused in early life, and how the initial microbes that we're exposed to help to train our immune systems to be prepared for any of these challenges in adulthood. So we know when babies inside their mother, they're essentially sterile. They're not exposed to any sort of microbiome, like a mass of microbes. It's controversial whether they might be exposed to a handful of bugs, but really they have no microbiome. And then when we come out into the world, we're suddenly exposed to this whole. We acquire this coating of organisms. We acquire this new organism, or this new organ almost, which develops over the course of a few months and the first couple of years of life. So what I'm looking at is how that massive exposure to a diversity of microorganisms helps to train the immune system to make us more or less prone to infection in later life. So we look at things like COVID, for example, and we see some people are really prone to it and get really sick and die when they might otherwise seem healthy, and some people never seem to get infected at all or become infected and don't get sick. So although I'm not working on COVID specifically, I'm looking at how our initial exposures to a microbiome in early life help our immune system in our gut train certain cells which can remain imprinted and stay changed until adulthood and become prepared. And that if we're exposed to antibiotics, for example, in that early life period when our microbiome is being established, how that might impact in a negative way the training of our immune systems.
Yeah, when I was young, I had a lot of ear infections, and I remember getting antibiotics, a number of times because of inner ear infections, and I always kind of wondered what did that do to me,
Yeah, I mean, the kids are exposed to a huge number of antibiotics these days, and you know, in many occasions, of course, it's necessary, you know, but in many cases, kids are coming in with just regular colds and flu, and parents don't want to leave a doctor's office without, you know, getting something in their hand and getting something out of it, rather than just, you know, let the kid rest for a couple of days and stay off school, and he or she will be all right in a couple of days. And this is the issue, you know, the over-prescription of antibiotics is having a huge effect on our health.
So let's talk a little more about that, just because I'm particularly interested. What, you know, so one thing that you can do is make darn sure that it's actually a bacterial infection before you actually take the antibiotics, right? You can ask the doctor, could you check and see if this is actually strep throat or if it's just some viral thing that the antibiotics aren't going to touch. And then what about those of us, because I just had a shoulder surgery, and I had a rotator cuff surgery, and I went in to the doctor about a week afterwards, and I told him, hey, you know, I think something's up here. Like, this feels infected. All these other ones feel fine, but this feels infected. And the doctor's aide looked at it and said, don't worry about it. And then more than a month later, we found out that I had a really severe infection in my shoulder, and I had 3 debridement surgeries, and they put a pick in my arm, which is a tube that goes into a vein and then dumps out right at your heart. And I was on 2 antibiotics, daptomycin and something else, for like 6 weeks. And then I was on, you know, just plain old penicillin for about 3 months. And then I was on daptomycin for about 3 months. And, you know, I have this feeling that it really impacted me. And I think that it had a huge impact on my mood and on my mental state. And I'm wondering what I can do, you know, like, what can I do now? Like, I'm eating kimchi, I'm taking probiotics. I even ordered some Escherichia coli Nissen from Canada, you know, and I'm taking that. But, you know, if someone's got to take, like, let's say they get an ear infection or something, or they just have to run a course of antibiotics, is there something we can do?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've done as much as you can.
Yeah.
You know, there's good evidence that if you take some probiotics during and immediately after a course of antibiotics, this will reduce at least your risk of antibiotic associated diarrhea. So there's kind of lots of studies that show that, and collectively there is a good effect of that. But ideally, you don't just want to, you know, supplement with one species. You know, your microbiome has taken a big hit after having, especially like you have, you know, these heavy antibiotics for a long period of time. That really you want to reestablish that in a way, much like you're saying, through, you know, not just seeding it, as I call it, but also through feeding the microbiome as well. You know, providing it with those sources of food and fertilizers that will allow it to grow. And that means, you know, eating lots of fiber, eating fermented foods, and that way we acquire more microbes. There's many ways that our microbiome can be impacted. You know, we share microbes between different people. We acquire some from, you know, the environment and outdoors as well. So it's really trying to have a diverse diet, take some probiotics to reduce that risk of diarrhea, and trying to feed it that way that it'll help recover. I mean, and there's the interesting research showing that, you know, maybe we should all be, you know, freezing a fecal sample before we have to take antibiotics, you know, so that we can then, you know, recover our microbiome, you know, after a case. Now, nobody wants to do that by themselves, but maybe that'll be the future of medical research, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I have a 7-year-old. Maybe I should look into how we can.
Don't try that at home.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, and I suppose that, The other thing that I'm doing is trying to eat organic raw. I think that maybe onions, if I understand it right, are a good source of replenishment for the microbiome. And and of course, you need the prebiotics like the fiber and things to help that all. So it's really,
Yeah, yeah, of
and
course.
that was just
Onions and garlic and leeks and things like that all have, are high sources of these prebiotics.
the other thing that I did some work with after we worked together, Rory, was a company that was working on the microbiome for skin. And I think that, what you probably know the statistics better than I do, but I think that some big majority of our bodies and maybe our body weight or whatever is not even human, right?
Yes.
And are you hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you fine. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. The
Great, great.
yeah, people have tried to estimate these kind of weight of the microbiome and numbers of cells in the body. Obviously, it's quite a hard thing to do, but we can come up with these rough estimates.
If we counted up the number of cells in the body, we're probably 40 trillion bacterial cells and 30 trillion human cells. So we're outnumbered by bacterial cells. But of course, bacteria aren't the only microorganisms that live within inside
Yeah.
us. We have trillions more viruses and fungi and these other types of microbes. But we know, at least genetically, there's a higher number of genes within all these different organisms. So we're only about 1% human genetically, and about 99% microbial, if not more. So we really are kind of like a walking,
Wow, wow,
jungle.
wow, wow. Say that again.
So if you count up like the number of genes, so the human genome has somewhere between 23,000, 25,000 genes, which control, everything from how we, digest our blood sugar and our eye color and various things like that. But if you add up all the number of genes within all the bacteria and microbes in the body, there are millions. And so we're only about 1% genetically human if you were to add up all these genes. And that really kind of, drives home
That's so
that
fascinating.
we're, we are a holobiont, as people like to call us. We're really living in connection with these microbes, and they're essential for our health and disease.
Yeah, and the company that I was working with, they were trying to fix the microbiome on the skin to get rid of things like acne. And typically, acne is something where they give you what I was taking, doxycycline, and just try to wipe it out. But what they're doing is trying to rejigger the balance of things, and that seemed to work quite well.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, for a long time now, people have just focused on the gut, but we have these microbiomes all over our body, and certainly, yeah. There's so many skin conditions, particularly in the kind of our the origins of which begin in early life and childhood. Children are mainly prone to acne during adolescence. But also things like atopic dermatitis and other conditions. These are kind of auto-inflammatory conditions which might be induced by these changes in the microbiome in early life, like I mentioned, and how they help to train the immune system within the skin, for example, and create this kind of inflammation that causes these conditions. So, there are great companies and research investigating how to change that. And can we rebalance the microbes that are there in order to reduce the incidence of these conditions?
So, change of topic, if you're okay with it. What are some of the things that you've noticed over the last 8 years of doing what you do in terms of communicating the science? You know, because having a great idea is one thing, but being able to get it out into the world and have it make a difference and get funding for it and all that is a different thing.
Absolutely. communication and public engagement in science has become absolutely critical. So, when you work in public institutions like me in universities, we're constantly applying for money in order just to do our work day to day. And so it's a very tough environment to live in. We can't just do our research every day like we like to. We have to constantly ask for money. And what I've noticed in the last number of years is that one of the critical components in these applications is how are you going to engage with the public and how are you going to communicate the results of this research. Before, in all these funding applications, that would never have been asked. It would never have been considered. It would have just been, what are you going to do with the money? Who are you going to hire, and what tests are you going to do in the lab? And now, there's a huge weight applied to your public engagement and explaining to the people who are paying for this research through their taxes why it's beneficial and why they should be paying through their taxes for this research. So really, I've kind of noticed that the younger generation of scientists, I hope I include myself now in that younger generation. Maybe I'm kind of a little bit past the younger generation, but everyone is really becoming engaged and becoming really good at communicating their science through social media is great, through classic forms of media as well. Whereas older generations of scientists, not to stereotype, but may look down on that a little bit and may see it with less value and less importance. But really, it really is important, and it's a great thing that people are becoming better at doing that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that there's a certain level of, not to be too mean, but I think there's a certain level of arrogance in not thinking that you need to communicate,
Oh, absolutely. We kind of typically scientists would see that as a thing that people in private practice or private industry would do, and see it as a kind of something that people in the business world might do. But we all need to do it. We all need to be able to communicate, not just between ourselves, between scientists. We need to be able to communicate with the public as well.
Yeah. Well, so what are the benefits of the research that you're working on?
The benefits are that we can try and figure out why people are more or less prone to infection. That's what I'm studying at the moment. If we do have a disturbance of the gut microbiome in early life, whether that's via too many antibiotics, or whether that's via bad diet, or whether that's via getting more formula feeding than breast milk. First of all, what are the implications of that? Does that mean that we are going to be more prone to gastrointestinal infections later on? And secondly, how can we treat that, and how can we change that if we have had these kind of disturbances to our microbiome in early life? So hopefully it means that we'll come up with new nutritional therapies, pharmacological therapies, probiotic therapies that can be targeted at the microbiome in adulthood, that mean that we don't get these infections, or that at least we don't get as sick from these infections, whether that's COVID, whether that's food poisoning, or any other kind of type of infection that we have, and trying to re-establish the microbiomes that we had prior to living in a very kind of industrialized world.
So I know that we're coming up on time, and you've got to go pick up your son, which is very exciting. Can I ask you about the diet aspect? Like, what are you seeing in terms of good, bad, what we're doing diet-wise these days?
I think people are slowly realizing that we don't have to just feed ourselves. We have to feed this microbial organ as well, which has different nutritional and dietary requirements to us. We tend to simplify nutrition into fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, and for a long time have neglected fiber. And fiber, which isn't technically a nutrient because we as humans can't digest it, we don't have the enzymes to break it down, it's actually really important because it is digested by our microbiomes, and they do have the enzymes to digest that and break that down. And so we really need to focus on getting our fiber. I'm not too sure the exact values in the US, but certainly in the UK, I think that the recommendation is to get 30 grams of fiber a day, and the average intake is only about 18 grams a day. So people are almost only getting about half of their recommended daily intake of fiber. And so fiber comes from, plant-based sources. We should be eating as much kind of plant foods that come from non-animal sources. So that doesn't just have to be fruit and vegetables. It can be nuts and seeds and beans and spices, and all of these different things are really important. We should be getting a diversity of these things, not having the same old chicken and broccoli every night. Trying new things whenever you go and do your food shopping. My rule is buy something new that you don't usually buy. And then, of course, eating fermented foods as well, because these are the sources of many good microbes, and the microbes have done the work to create this nice food, whether it's kimchi or yogurt or any of these things. And they're really good for the microbiome as well. So I think they're the main tips and goals. But of course, people are studying specific foods and what they might do under specific circumstances. For example, kiwis and things like flaxseed and things like that are very good in constipation and certain cases of diarrhea and things like that. But in general, we should be getting higher sources of fiber.
Groovy. Well, listen, are you active on social media? Is there any place that people should follow you?
Yeah, I'm active as probably. I have social media profiles, but I've kind of lost my activity over the last couple of years, but I need to re-engage with it. No, I have Twitter, and I have Facebook, and I have Instagram, and so if people can figure out how to spell my very complicated Irish name, Dr. Ruairi Robertson, then you'll find me online. I'm down as the NutriDoctor as well on a couple of my profiles. But yeah, I have a podcast as well, which I'm hoping to bring out another season of, and I in which I interview some of the best microbiome researchers around the world to find out what they're doing in the lab right now and to discuss the implications of that. So that podcast is called Biomes, Biomes, and it's found Spotify, iTunes, everywhere. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some new episodes of that coming out soon as well.
And how do people spell your name? We'll put all this in the show notes too, but just so they got it.
There's an unnecessarily high number of vowels in my name. It's Ruairi. It's the Irish way of spelling Rory. So yeah, anyway, if you can spell that, then you'll find me online somewhere.
Right on. Well, yeah, at least there's not as many of you as there is John, Well, so listen, thanks for taking the time to catch up with me, and thanks for enlightening us about the microbiome. And we'll put links to your speech and to your social media into the show notes. And I just wish you all the best. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks a million, John. Yeah, it was great catching up with you after such a long time.
Likewise. And to those of you listening, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on SpeakLikeALeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.